Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today, whether you're listening live on Twitch or YouTube or listening to a replay of this. My name's Jonah Kowall, CTO at logs.io. And I'm super excited about our conversation today. Someone that I've spent a good amount of time with recently. Andy is joining us. He does lots of different things. I think you'll find the discussion enjoyable and definitely pay attention to Andy's work and what he's doing in the industry. So over to you, Andy. Great to have you on. Thanks.
Thank you. Good to be with you. Good to be on the podcast. Glad to share whatever the small amount of wisdom I have with your viewers. I am Andy Thurai, founder and principal at FieldCTO.com. You can check out my work at the FieldCTO. That's thefieldcto.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at Andy Thurai.
Cool, thanks. And just wanted to start off and ask you a little bit about your background and your journey. I know you've done a lot of different things throughout your career and shifted a little bit, as have I. So if you could let the listeners know what you're doing today and kind of where you are in your journey, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, so been in the enterprise world for a number of years. Worked for IBM twice, actually, Nortel, BMC, Oracle, and the like. Mostly worked for large enterprise vendors, per se. Done a myriad of roles: architect, system analyst, program manager, tech evangelist, tech strategist, and tech executive, all over the place. Seen a lot of good and bad things along the way. Specialized in emerging tech, specifically off late. Things like AIOps, observability, and other AI and ML related topics.
Very cool. And obviously where you are today is you're doing a lot of analyst type work, advisory work, various other things. Could you tell us a little bit about how you've evolved down that path and what you're doing? You obviously mentioned some of your coverage, but what you've been doing in that part of your career would be great to hear about.
Sure. So I just got started as an analyst recently, right? But I've always enjoyed critiquing others' work. My kids hate that, but it's easier than building it, right? So just kind of things fell in place when GigaOM asked me if I'd like to be an analyst covering some of the topics that's near and dear to my heart, things like AIOps, observability, productionizing AI and ML, etc. So here I am.
Yeah, so AIOps is an interesting topic, and back when my former colleague at Gartner created the term, it was really confusing to us, even internally as analysts at Gartner. We had a hard time with it because it was so broad and so nebulous in terms of what it was. So what is your take on the whole AIOps thing? Because it's super confusing. You go to one vendor, they say one thing. You go to another vendor that doesn't even compete with the first one, and they say something else. So I kind of just wanted to hear your take after covering that space and what you think about AIOps.
Yeah, so well, that's a tough question, right?
Broad and nebulous.
Right, because it's a new market, as you said. It's just coined recently by you guys, by Gartner. And I gotta vent this off my chest. The first thing that I have a problem with the name itself. Not about what it does, is when I look at data ops, it's about getting data to production grade, the life cycle of data. When it comes to ML ops, it's about ML machine learning models and do the same thing to the ML ops. But when it comes to AI ops, it's not that. It's about applying AI to IT operations. So it confuses the heck of a lot of people, right? So look, I've been doing this, the observability also recently of the.
That's the second part to my question, is asking what you think of that, because that's
okay. So let's talk about it, because those are the two things that are very confusing to a lot of people, right?
Right.
That's why I said it's a tough question. So, especially with a lot of snake oil sales out there, right? Everybody is a total observability vendor now, and everyone is an AIOps vendor, right?
Yeah.
So I'll do my shameless plug here as well. We just finished the observability radar report for GigaOM. We are going through the fact check process now, and will be released soon. You can find a lot of information in there. Some of you might already know some information, and the vendor placement might shock you, right? But talk about the overall space itself. Up until now, just monitoring the host or monitoring the network or monitoring the application at a high level is good enough to figure out where and what the problem is, because there can only be so many things that can go wrong with an application, right? For a couple of reasons. One, again, I'm talking about up until now, not the way we are starting to build things recently, right? One is applications that are built as monoliths, so you know the vulnerable areas because you've been there for a while. Two, the whole process is very mature in enterprises, at least building a whole business applications. The build process, the test process, the release process, the security, vulnerability, governance, risk assessment, the frameworks, down to billing and chargebacks are all built over years, very mature, and use it in a certain way. So the thing is, the point I'm trying to get at is when you try to release a new release, which is also a mature cycle, could take weeks or even months, it's easy to figure out what went wrong, where it went wrong. But then cloud disrupted everything, right? Whether it's good or bad, we are rebuilding things as fast as we can. Monitoring is the least of our worries right now for most enterprises during this build phase. But with the current cloud-based distributed cloud-native applications, monitoring it is more important than ever in my mind. Especially you have no clue of where your applications lie or even what components they use. Mostly the DevOps and development teams are responsible for building a smaller portion of the app. If you're a developer, your DevOps team or apps team, you're not going to be, building the whole thing by yourself. You probably build a very small portion of it. You don't even know who else will be using that microservice, right? Yeah. So this means you need to have a full higher level visibility from an ops level on what's happening. And more importantly, if something happens, you'll be able to drill down to find out what's happening, why it's happening, and what you need to do to fix it, how we can fix it. So total observability, in my view, again, this is Andy's personal view, should include all aspects of what, where, and why, along with the how, right? So if you, I don't know how long you want me to go in this topic, but
I mean it's interesting. I like your take on it.
Right. So if you're to drill down, right, the holistic view, if you want to do, of observability, it's commonly measured by the three pillars of observability, as we call it. You can call it as a golden telemetry, as they call it, or whatever you want it. It's basically metrics, traces, and logs, right? And when you throw in events, which is the fourth acronym, which basically people call that as a MELT, M-E-L-T. I kind of like that name. If you're not observing your system holistically, your IT will melt, is what I tell people, right? So if your system slows down, your metrics should tell you what is happening to your system. But that's only one portion of the equation. You found out, okay, my system is not working. But then your traces or distributed traces should tell you where it's happening in the process, in the entire process. Again, keep in mind, this is not a monolith we are talking about. We are talking about a distributed applications. And your logs should tell you why it's happening. And some combination of them, all of them, including events, should tell you how it can be fixed. Now, so that's observability portion of it. AIOps, in my mind, is part of observability, even though some would argue with that. Ultimately, AIOps is about one specific thing. It's about reducing the MTTR. Well, specifically MTTI, mean time to identification of the problems. If you find out what's happening, you can fairly quickly fix it, assuming you know what the hell you're doing, right? So reducing the MTTR as close to zero as possible. So
yeah. And then the other issue with AIOps is that we all have lots of monitoring systems, right?
Right.
So the challenge is, although we would love to unify all of our tracing and all of our metrics and all of our logs, it's not always possible. So sometimes you have to use the other tools to help unify data sources.
That's exactly right. So that's one of the things what AIOps brings that observability doesn't do it, because it's kind of a unicorn to have an observable system which will do everything. I mean, not every system does everything. Monitor the entire stack and have all three of the golden telemetry and then put them all in the same data lake. It's impossible. That's where AIOps comes in. A lot of vendors out there don't want to put one over the other, but they go in and pull all this data. It encompasses specific use cases they do, right? Things like event correlation, anomaly detection, more importantly, noise reduction, so you don't get ton of alerts, alert suppression, and in an advanced level of thinking, you can also throw in things like IT automation, runbook automation, and self-healing systems, etc. Right? I mean, that's capacity planning is another use case that AI some of the vendors do. In other words, ultimately, when an issue happens in your distributed system, a machine should understand it the same way a human would understand and do a remedial action as a human would and make the system resilient to those type of events in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense for sure.
You've been in the space for a while. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I would want to bring up, which is something where when I think about monitoring, I think of operational monitoring. I'm doing this to see what the system is doing, how I fix it. But I think observability also means that I have to start tracking and understanding some business metrics. And this is something that's been happening more and more. And a big part of it is how, as you're developing an application, you define what it is that you want to track that's more like a business metric. Who's using my application? What are they doing? How much money am I transacting? How many users are signing up for service? And you want to monitor these just like a CPU or a disk or transactional throughput or latency. So I see unifying the business and technical metrics together as being one of the big pushes of observability. But it's not new. I mean, like when my former company, when AppDynamics was founded, the business transaction was the one thing that the company was always trying to get after.
Right.
So like over 10 years ago, people were thinking about how do I monitor the business with software? And it's still, a big challenge for a lot of people today. But we've gotten way better at it because we're doing it in the development lifecycle now versus trying to extract it from an application that's already built. So, the other comment I wanted to dig into is the data lake thing. And most of these projects for data lakes fail because you're trying to boil the ocean, right? And so you end up getting 10% of the project done and then saying, oh, we don't have money for the other 90%. So
done.
The value's not there. And that's why data lakes are generally not well accepted because everyone realizes that they're just a giant money pit that you're never going to finish the work on, right?
And the collecting data from various sources where you put it, it's a never ending.
Storage becomes a big problem. So you really, a lot of the tools where they just are taking a little piece of the data and not storing it for long term. This makes it a lot more economical. I mean, this is a challenge that we have in our customer base too, where people are like, I want all of my logs for a year. And it's like, okay, that'll be, some absurd amount of money. What do you need that for? Well, we might have to look at something that happened 9 months ago. And, it's like, well, there are better ways to solve that problem. But you're looking at the fringe case and then saying, oh, we're going to spend a bunch of money to solve that problem. And, maybe that's not the right approach, right?
Yeah, how much of money it costs to solve a business problem that's not worth anything. I do want to make one quick comment about the business observability part of it too. That's actually a very, very, very good point. a lot of vendors that we looked at, they didn't particularly, concentrate on that side of things. For example, the technology portion of the observability, a lot of them racing to do a lot of things, which I'm sure we'll talk through this podcast. But only very few vendors were tying their observability solutions to business KPIs. For example, even the service level objectives, if you set for a specific business application. Even one of the article that I wrote on Newstalk about 6 months ago is about how do you control the cloud spending or infrastructure spending or even a serverless spending based on what your business defines. For example, the enrollment application, benefits enrollment application for that matter, during the peak periods of November and maybe December in some companies, it cannot go down. It has to be live all the time. But during the month of January through October, who cares? If it goes down, fine, we'll fix it sometime. So it depends. Business needs to tell them, this is my spend limit, this is what I want to spend, this is my business KPI, business value, and then technical observability will pick up from that. That I see a huge disconnect in that area.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, but the challenge is that technical buyers want to be sold to in a technical way, and they have technical requirements, and so it sometimes is difficult, as someone that's worked in the vendor space, to get the ear of the person that's going to really care about the business side of things per se. And a lot of times, like a product manager doesn't really care about observability, but I think it's changing slowly.
The
Sure.
other point is also, yes, I agree that until now they never cared about, because, this is another thing I did on a podcast I did recently, because people were viewing, at least the business executives were viewing the IT as a cost center until now. But now the COVID changed everything, because IT became your business. If you're I did a podcast suggesting if your IT sucks, your business sucks, right? So essentially that's what it is. So and then they're coming to them and saying that, hey, IT is my business now. How can I keep it up running if I have to keep my business up? And then they were saying, okay, give me your business KPIs and I'll tell you how much it'll cost. You give me the money, I'll fix it up. So kind of coming together, kind of COVID and other things working from home accelerated that, but there's still a huge gap. I'm with you on that.
Yeah. And so going back to obviously the 3, or in your case, you said 4 pillars of observability, the other kind of like mega market behind this one that I spent a lot of time in, APM, is changing because distributed tracing is taking a different approach to the problem, obviously trying to make it simpler, more commoditized, but it doesn't have all the bells and whistles that these APM solutions had in the past. I mean, what's your take on observability, distributed tracing, and how that is intersecting or changing APM?
So let's see. That's a loaded question there. So let me start off with I always, when I tell people, talk to some of the customers when I do my consulting work, I start off with this quote. You know who Yogi Berra is?
The baseball player?
Yankee great. He made a statement suggesting you can observe a lot by just watching, right?
True.
And that's a statement which may not be applicable here fullest extent, but observability is more than just monitoring or just APM is the point I want to make. It's not just watching, right? Of course, APM stands for, application performance monitoring. Monitoring, that's what it is, right? And there are other pieces getting added to that. So that's where the APM tools doesn't offer a complete picture in my mind. You could do, in the past, APM tools used to do the red being the rates and errors and duration or latency measurement kind of things. But that's only metrics data and time series data. And you could throw in, say, uptime metrics, real user monitoring, digital experience monitoring. All of them give you one piece of the puzzle, but of what is happening. That you're able to get that using those solutions.
Yeah.
Once you do that, right? Once you figure out there is a problem, of course, I'm not minimizing the impact that has in an IT shop. Of course, it's very important because you need to figure out there is a problem. Otherwise, you'd be thinking everything is hunky-dory, but your customers find out you have a problem. And then once you find out, you need to double click on where is it happening, particularly when you have a distributed system. This is where the traces, as you were mentioning, can help. And APM vendors have expanded to almost all of them that I looked at, have added the tracing portion to that application level monitoring as well, right? So you could basically trace the transactions through the entire start to finish and figure out where it failed or failing, right? Especially if your application consists of a bunch of microservices and you're making API calls either in cloud or out of cloud or other locations, you need a way to trace the problem to its source. Maybe only one component of the whole thing is failing, which is not even a critical component. Let's say, for example, one customer was telling me they had some well thought out authentication authorization service, which is more of a sidecar-ish, which was failing, and that's killing the entire application, their order taking application, which is kind of screwy, right? So you need to be able to quickly identify the exact location of the problem down to the microservice on where it's happening, right? And after you figure that piece out, then you should be able to get into the logs to see what happened. There are other ways you can find out, but log gives you perhaps the most detailed information of what exactly had happened. And more importantly, by knowing that, also some combinational information of how can you fix it quickly, not about what happened, where happened, and what's happening, but what can you do to fix it right away? Again, going back to my original point about making MTTR 0, right? A couple of vendors not only capture the traces, but also they actually capture the actual transaction data itself, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right.
That capability has been going on in APM for a long time. All of them have done some level of distributed tracing. They've done sampling ever since, Wiley, which is the first modern APM product that actually Lou founded over. He's the CEO and founder in New Relic. He figured out a way to basically reverse engineer running Java applications and extract transactional topology information on the fly. That was basically the patent that they created, which was the predecessor to all the APM stuff. And, App Dynamics just made it better, and Dynatrace changed the way that they were doing it. And everything's always been founded on the idea of instrumentation and distributed tracing. Right. But all of them do it slightly differently, and they use other tricks. And most of them are actually profilers, which is pretty interesting. So you can actually get down into the code level. When we look at distributed tracing today, although we've standardized on the way that we trace, more so with all the open source, and we'll definitely get to that in a couple minutes, they don't really do profiling, and they don't do, you mentioned that the APM tools collect metrics. The distributed tracing tools don't really collect metrics unless the vendors build that on top. So there are definitely a lot of gaps in distributed tracing still, but it's lighter weight and more standardized. And the reason why we had to do that is because as we move from Java and .NET into newer languages like Python and Go, you can't instrument them dynamically the way that you could with Java, because there's no JVM, they don't work the same way. So more and more of our languages now are compiled, they're higher performing, and you have to do different things to instrument it. So, it's a lot trickier to do it today versus when things were in Java and the agents could just be really smart, and that's how it works.
Who wrote and what wrote. You don't have access to all the code now. I'll also mention this. Now that you mentioned about the other capabilities of observability, such as code profiling, there's another thing I've seen with some of the vendors, which is pretty cool, is the dependency mapping, right?
Yeah, for sure.
In old days, we used to pull that information from CMDB, which is somewhat of a static mapping, right?
That never worked.
They forgot to change it, or they took a different route and it's not up to date. That's a whole set of another issues. But the concept of having the topology and the map from there, you kind of tell you a whole another story how to integrate with the change management, CMDB, and among other vendors. So that's another area that, by using the distributed tracing, if you can build a dependency mapping or topology map, it's easy to do that as well. And speaking of the other capabilities, one of the things I loved, not many vendors provide that I loved, some vendors gave, is what I call it as a kind of a risk analysis. So it's basically, doing analysis of the changes.
Yeah.
How risky is it to make the changes to that application and potentially predict what systems that it can bring down, right? So there are variations of it. Actually, I'm advising an Australian company called Ketonic. They do this very well. They're not part of the necessarily observability vendor mix. Imagine if you can predict with a high accuracy on what systems might go down and when using AI and ML, whether or not you're doing a change frequently. That's a huge advantage.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
Yeah. So I mean, things like you can integrate with the DevOps pipeline. You can also check to see, watch the blue, green, or canary setup and decide to roll back and revert to the older version based on the indications of flags that it's giving. It's a lot easier to do that way than debug live in production. Trust me, a lot of customers still do that.
Sure.
Another cool feature, actually, but while we are at it, the APM vendors don't do that. I'll mention this. That I found out very interesting is, some vendors do. How did my service look like at time X, right? Sort of like a time travel.
Sure.
You take back to what happened, go to time X and then walk backwards to now, and then what changes went through, right? Most of the times, the changes that kill your application, I think it was Will Capelli who famously said that 90% of the downtime can be tracked back to changes, right?
Yes.
So that's another cool feature that I like in the space that a lot of vendors are building.
Yeah, I mean, with pipelines, it's something you actually see a lot, even in open source. We do it in our stuff as well, and you can do it in Grafana and Kibana. Is you can actually put markers on the graphs so that when you're doing a release, you just make a web service call over to the observability tool, and it'll actually create a marker, and then you can use that for time-based comparison. So you could say, what was my memory usage before and after the last release? Oh, I see there's a memory leak or an increase or a change. So it definitely helps a lot with doing that type of analysis on changes. So that's good news about pipelines, is you can automate some of that instrumentation. So I did want to mention or talk a little bit about open source. And it's an interesting time right now because a lot of the vendors, that used to have proprietary systems are now going all in on open source. And then there are some vendors where they've always sort of open source pieces of their solution, but everyone's working together on some pretty interesting initiatives as a community. How do you think that this is going to work out? Because it's super disruptive to a lot of the companies today where they charge based on the number of agents or the number of hosts or this type of model. And as you open the data collection, you've got to shift over to some type of data-based pricing, and that causes all kinds of weird problems. So how do you kind of see these companies balancing commercial and open source?
It's good and bad, right? Open source, that is. So it's very good in the sense that, I don't have to pay for it as an enterprise, and it's built with a collaboration of best of minds. But when I have to go through that setting up, securing it, scaling it, so many things to productionizing and making it fit in my enterprise.
Oh, if you were to run your own open source.
Right? I mean, unless, there are companies like yours, you, on the other hand, there are sort of like commercial versions offer all of this, but I mean, there's a commercial version companies offer full solution that cost may not fit your budget, and there's a bunch of companies like you. It's open source with stuff built on top of it, not as expensive, but you have making open source work. Or I go DIY and do all of that. So you don't pay as much as the proprietary vendors. You're not locked in them. Kind of strike a balance. There is no silver bullet, right, when it comes down to it. It all depends on what you want and what's being offered by who and at what cost. Cost is just not a commercial software. When it comes to the open source, when you're trying to do DIY, the energy and resources and the time it takes to build something using an open source and make it production ready, the opportunity lost cost while you're busy building it could be a lot more, right? So that's a judgment call. But I'll tell you this, companies are willing to embrace the open source more, especially in the cloud environments, than on-prem.
Yeah.
On-prem, remember how you used to be very tightly controlled by the IT? They get to decide, they being the IT, get to decide what gets in and out. With cloud, with the DevOps groups, it's almost like shadow IT concept. Most times the core IT may not even see or get a say in it. And I think you and I talked about this before. If you are using Kubernetes, containers, etc., you are already using open source.
Right.
It's just another step to add Prometheus or Fluentd or Logstash or something else. And the DevOps guys and the ops guys and others, they're willing to experiment, adopt, embrace, and productionize, if it works the way they want it. And the DevOps and dev teams love open source, of course, because it's easy, free to build, and works what they want. It's ops streams that struggle to bring it to the mainstream, right? Yeah. So especially when a lot of commercial vendors start supporting this open source tools, whether it's Prometheus and otherwise, and probably start embracing the OpenTelemetry, it becomes integral part of your system. You don't even have to think about it. You mentioned some of the APM vendors, don't want to name names, but they start supporting. I'm not talking about you. You guys obviously built on Elk Stack and other stuff, mostly open source, but I'm talking about even the proprietary vendors, APM solution. They build some of their components, whether it's their data collectors or exporters and stuff. They use open source stuff because it's easier. So if you're already integrated, which means open source is part of your proprietary system to begin with. So that's where you need to figure out where you want to go, right? What do you think?
Well, no, I completely agree with you, but it causes major pricing disruption because as APM commoditizes, the price comes down considerably.
Mm-hmm.
So like what we used to be able to sell something for as a commercial APM vendor is nowhere near what people pay today for distributed tracing systems. And so it's highly disruptive to the way that they operate. So as they expand to more different types of data, they try to normalize the pricing. And so you see a lot of experiments going on right now in the industry, and I don't think anyone's really figured out the right way to price a lot of this stuff. And this is the most obvious, since you did mention Prometheus, which is super interesting technology. We just made an announcement, Amazon just made an announcement for new services to collect or integrate with Prometheus, collect that data, store it. But if you take a look at the AWS Prometheus pricing page, if you can figure out what any of that is going to cost you, good luck, because they charge you for every data point, for every query, for every little piece of every little thing, where I think it would be actually hard to even put that into your budget because you don't really know what it's going to cost. I'm a big believer of trying to make the pricing relatively simple and hoping that it works out. Some customers are going to abuse you. They're going to query you like crazy and slam your systems, and you're going to end up having costs. Mm-hmm. Some will underutilize the system, and you hope that it works out. And that's generally what vendors tend to do. But when you really try to make a service the way that Amazon does, where it's very granular in its pricing, it creates a lot of pressure on the users to try to manage how much the stuff is going to cost them. So I think there's a lot of experiments going on, and I think there's going to be a lot of challenges for some of the models out there.
Right. Well, now that you touched on the AWS getting more involved with the Prometheus stuff, I want to touch on that a little bit because I've been doing quite a bit of research on that. They're not one of the vendors we looked at for the radar, but my personal point of view, it's that it's good. It's very good, actually. Here's why. initially, when a small to mid-sized enterprise start out, it's not easy for them to set up or try out to see if Prometheus works for them, right? The scalability, the managing the service, security, all kinds of issues. Yeah, Amazon charges in a weird way. That's not new, right? I mean, even with going back to that the reserve instances and the combination of that of they're always like that, right? You should know upfront that what is going to cost.
Yeah.
Charging them for queries on the data and even storing but they can try and see if it works. They can use that Prometheus, that is, as for all of their enterprise needs when they're on AWS cloud or other clouds. And then if you start using it, if it makes sense to you, if it becomes too expensive, which is a good problem to have, which means you figured out that it's going to work for me, right, then at that time you can either self-manage or manage using one of the other providers, right? Or you could build your own things using, Thanos or Thanos, however you say it, and then Cortex.
What Amazon's using. Yeah.
Right. So Cortex is an option. There are options, if you want to go cheap. It's a cost versus customization versus implementation you have to look at. Yeah. And the other thing is also the AWS managed service that our AMP offers is the scalability aspect, right? I mean, it can scale to like millions of unique time series metrics from a huge container cluster environment without skipping a beat, right? I mean, they can also do the multi-AZ replication within the region, integrate the security with the identity and access management system of AWS. And then when you throw in Grafana, which is also offered as a managed service, and then you have CloudWatch, you have Elasticsearch, and then the AWS has the distro. I don't know if it is fully production version yet for OpenTelemetry. That's the powerful combination right there. You just have to worry about the 1,000 other things you need to worry about in productionizing your application. Well, right?
I know they want to unify some things over time, but it's going to take a while because they have a lot of different agents and technologies between X-Ray, CloudWatch, and OpenTelemetry, Prometheus. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, but obviously the industries, and including Amazon, is rallying around the OpenTelemetry project, which I was hoping by the time we were on this podcast, we would be talking about the general availability, which was supposed to be about 10 days ago from today. But there's been quite a few setbacks in the project around just the general acceptance for when GA is going to occur. And it seems like, from the latest discussions in the community, that it's likely going to be sometime in the second quarter, which is quite a ways off from the middle of December. We're still looking at a few months away. And even for that general availability, it's a pretty low bar. The project is looking at having traces finalized, having metrics finalized in terms of the specification and APIs, and then also 3 languages supported in tracing in general availability. Mm-hmm. There's still a lot of work to be done on metrics, and we haven't even started on logging. I mean, we have a stack that's not even frozen yet, and there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. So I think we're pretty far away from the dream of OpenTelemetry unifying all of these data types. But nonetheless, there's lots of companies and engineers behind it trying to make it happen. So it's a valiant effort, but a pretty big effort, and it's taking a lot longer than everyone wants it to. So, yeah.
I hear you.
I didn't know if you had any comments or
so the one comment about Prometheus, we switch gears from speaking about Prometheus to OpenTelemetry. So one thing my pet peeve is their QL and the query language, PROMQL.
Sure.
Man, it's, I guess somebody is spending a lot of time on fixing it. You guys also offering a Prometheus as a service, right? I mean, are you doing anything to fix that? Because that's the Achilles heel in my mind. For Prometheus.
Yeah, so everyone actually wants PROMQL because it makes it easy for you to move dashboards between solutions. So everyone's using Grafana as the front end, querying Prometheus, you use PROMQL. So it gives everyone a standard query language to work with. So it's actually considered an advantage, even though it is not very simple. interestingly, one of the folks who the guy who created Prometheus, Julius, he's been on one of our podcasts earlier. Really great.
I watched it. Yeah.
He has a new company called Prom Labs.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And he's building a front end to make PROMQL easier to use. So he's basically building like a UI for for using Prometheus. It's called Prom Lens, and it definitely, going back to your point, PROMQL is complicated. I don't find it natural, but lots of engineers do. They just get used to it and they can work with it easily. So, may not be an advantage for me because I'm not an expert in the query language, but a lot of folks are getting better and better at it. And obviously, I think Julius's new company is trying to make it easier for the masses to write these complicated queries.
Right. I mean, that's how it is, right? I mean, you find a way to fix things. I mean, engineers never accept that their product is, I don't want to say bad, but at least if their UI is good or usability aspect, they will always, push back. But for them to admit and fix it, that's great.
We actually, the number one complaint we get on our product, which is based on ELK, it's Kibana. It uses the query language that's part of Elasticsearch. Our customers complain to us about the query language, and it's like, well, it's ELK. We can't
not much I can do
one on top of it, but it's still, we're tied to the open source that we use. We're thinking about building an easy mode where you don't actually have to understand the language, but a lot of people get pretty frustrated with trying to write queries against it as well, because it has its own language and its own operators and various other things. Some people say it's an advantage if they've used ELK for years. They're like, oh, this is so easy, I already know what to do.
Right.
Everyone.
I mean, query language is Achilles heel for any solution. I mean, it's not just now, even going back to the database days, right? I mean,
always, Those stupid things where they would change the join direction.
I remember that.
Yeah,
I remember.
It's always difficult. But yeah, cool. I didn't know if you wanted to cover off any other topics. Was there other things? I think we kind of talked about the basics of what I wanted to chat about today, but happy to open it up to anything else. Otherwise, if you want to wrap up with anything, we can go down that path.
No, I think we covered pretty much everything we wanted to cover overall, right? So
yeah, and thanks for joining, and everyone keep an eye out for Andy's upcoming research from GigaOM. I'm sure it'll be an interesting one, totally new piece of research in the market. And Andy's always writing new things. Definitely follow him on Twitter, LinkedIn. It's good to keep up with what he's up to. And there's a lot of interesting things going on in open source, as we discussed. Please get involved in OpenTelemetry if you're interested in doing so. We need everything from tech writers to designers to obviously coders. So definitely a great community to work with. At Logs.io, we do a lot on Jaeger too. It's another great community. So feel free to get involved, part of the CNCF there as well. And I guess with that, I hope everyone enjoyed this for the last 6 months of 2020. We're going to continue doing these monthly. We've got a great lineup for the next few months on the podcast. And hopefully everyone has a better 2021. Maybe we can all get together, have a drink, talk in person once again. That would be lovely. And everyone stay safe. Happy holidays. And Andy, thank you again for joining us, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me. Happy holidays and stay safe.
Awesome. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Happy New Year. Bye.